Hi guys. So happy to see you back at CRYPTID'S Den. It always feels like a little reunion around here. I hope you've been doing well and finding time to breathe. Tell me where you're watching from and what's been going on in your world. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. I always look forward to hearing from you. Now, let's get into it. Have you ever seen a drawing made by something not quite human? I have. After finishing my cancer treatment, I thought all I needed was quiet. Somewhere deep in the woods, far from the noise of Ashford. My husband and I packed up everything, brought our 2 dogs, and moved into an old farmhouse near Fog Hill. But the forest wasn't empty. There were footprints. Heavy breathing at night. And then, June disappeared. We found her collar, neatly placed under a mossy stone. That's when I knew something had taken her, and it wasn't just a wild animal. Most would have run, but I stayed. And one day, I found her wounded, scared. Not a monster, a mother, with her child beside her, burned, trembling. I called him Ashford. I cared for him like he was my own. And he looked at me. In that moment, the fear faded. What remained was trust. This isn't a story about beasts. It's about pain, connection, and choosing to see the soul beneath the silence. I came here hoping to heal, but in saving them, I found something even deeper. Sometimes what we call monsters are just parents trying to keep their children alive. And if you listen closely enough, you'll hear the wind still remembers. I used to think silence was soft, gentle, healing. When we first drove into Fog Hill, Oregon, the tires rolled slow over gravel, like bones being stirred. It was April, but the wind still held that sting of something uninvited, like we weren't supposed to be there just yet. Or ever. Mason tried to make it feel like a fresh start. It's just a break, not exile, he said, tapping the steering wheel. But the further we drove, the more the trees swallowed the road, and I stopped replying. After cancer, you stop needing words so much. You start listening instead. The house sat quiet at the edge of the redwoods. No welcome mat, no power running, just that old siding the color of ashes and a porch that leaned forward like it had a secret to tell. We stepped inside, and the air smelled like forgotten paper and pine sap. The kind of smell that settles into your lungs and makes you remember things that never happened to you. The kitchen had a window that looked out into nothing but trees. Not just trees. A wall of them. So thick the sunlight came in already tired. That night, Mason slept like a log. But I couldn't. My skin felt thin. Like the darkness outside knew I was awake. At 2:14 a.m., I heard it. A breath. Not wind. Not out a branch creak. This was something low and heavy and sad, came from the kitchen window. Just one long exhale, like something was leaning against the glass. Mourning. I didn't move at first. Just lay there, heart kicking like a bird against the cage. Then I whispered his name. Mason. But my voice didn't sound like mine. He got up, groggy, pulled on a shirt, grabbed the flashlight, went out through the front, circling. I stood at the doorway, holding my breath now too. He came back slower, eyes dark. There's nothing, he said, but he hesitated. And that's when I noticed the mud on his socks. The porch was dry. He'd gone farther. He didn't say more, but I saw his jaw twitch, that quiet kind of fear, the kind men don't talk about. The next morning we found it, just by the back steps, where the porch slats meet the dirt. The soil was soft from rain. And there, plain as day, was a footprint. It wasn't shaped like a boot or a paw. It had 3 thick toes and no heel, the middle one longer than my hand. Almost like someone had stepped down from the woods and didn't care about hiding it. Mason tried to brush it off. Could be a bear. Or a prank. But bears don't walk right up to kitchen windows and sigh. And the dogs in the neighborhood, if there were any, hadn't barked once last night. Later that day, We found something else. A piece of wood, half buried beneath the porch. Small, maybe the size of my palm, weathered, but smooth, like it had been held. It had 3 perfect dents on it. Round. Spaced evenly apart, like someone had tapped it with a heavy stick. A rhythm. I turned it over. The back was scorched, just barely. Mason didn't want to touch it. He looked at it like it might whisper something. We didn't talk about it that evening. We just made dinner and let the silence pile up again. But something had changed. That night, I couldn't sleep again, so I got up before dawn, before even the birds decided it was worth singing. I walked out onto the porch with my shawl around my shoulders, the one I'd been weaving since the hospital. Still unfinished. Still full of broken threads. The woods looked back at me. I swear they did. Not with eyes, with stillness, with a kind of pressure that builds in the space behind your ears. And I said it before I could stop myself. If you need something. I used to need saving too. The wind caught the edge of my shawl and lifted it like a hand. I don't know what I expected, but what I felt was the forest listening, not threatening, just waiting. And I think that's when I stopped believing in coincidence. Nothing about this place was random. Not the house. Not the footprint. Not the breath on the glass. Whatever was out there wasn't just passing through. It knew we were here. It had watched. And that first night, it had chosen not to break the window, not to come in. Just to let us hear it breathing. I didn't sleep much after that. But I started leaving out bits of honey on the railing. And Mason didn't ask why. We never said the word Bigfoot. Not once. Not then. But some things don't need names to be real. Some things live in the hush between heartbeats. Waiting. Watching. And I think, no, I know, it heard me that morning. Because the next night, it came closer. It started with fur. Black, thick, and tangled in a way that didn't make sense. Caught high on a branch I couldn't reach without jumping. I was out on my usual morning run. The dogs pulling ahead, paws light on the mist-slick trail. Fog Hill didn't really wake up until about 9, but the woods whispered early. June was always faster than fate. She ran like she had something to prove, like she was built from all the parts of me that refused to stay still. That morning, she stopped under the redwood, sniffed, circled, then backed away, her ears low, tail tucked. Fade just whined. That's when I saw it, 9 feet up, maybe higher, clinging to the branch like it had been ripped out by force. I reached for it with a stick, pulled it down. It was long, maybe 12 inches, and coarse as wire. Blacker than night. Smelled like wet pennies and ash. Not deer, not bear. Something else. I tucked it into a baggie when I got home, shoved it in the freezer. I didn't tell Mason right away. He'd say it was a coyote, maybe a wolf, if he were being generous. But coyotes didn't leave fur 9 feet off the ground. And that smell? Nothing should smell like that unless it's been dead a while or dreaming of death. That night, something tore through the chicken coop. We heard the crash around midnight. Mason went out with a floodlight and a bat, and I followed, barefoot on cold grass, heart beating like it was trying to escape. The coop was ripped, not broken, not chewed, torn, hinges bent, one side peeled open like a tin can. But nothing was dead. The chickens were wide-eyed, feathers puffed, but untouched. One had a slick trail of saliva across its back. Another had its beak against the corner, trembling like it had seen something that didn't need to make a sound to terrify. I didn't sleep again. I sat on the couch with the flashlight in my lap, the dogs at my feet. But they didn't growl. They didn't even lift their heads. They knew. The next morning, June didn't come back. I called her from the porch, called again from the tree line. Then the trails. We searched, me with scratches on my arms from thorns, Mason with silence on his lips. No tracks, no blood, no broken branches. Just gone, not lost, taken. Fig kept circling the same spot along the path we'd run yesterday. just beneath that same redwood, beneath where I found the fur. He sniffed once, then whimpered and lay down. That's where I found it. June's collar. It wasn't ripped or broken. The tag was still attached, the buckle unlatched. It had been placed, deliberately, beneath a moss-covered stone, right where the soil was soft and undisturbed. I knelt down, hands shaking, pulled it out. It was wet, soaked through, but not with blood, with rain, like someone had waited for the storm to pass. Then left it there, like a gesture, like a message. I didn't cry. Not then. I walked back to the house like I was moving through water, collar clenched in my fist, the sound of birds suddenly too loud. That night, Mason set up the trail cam. He said it was probably a mountain lion, that maybe June got spooked and slipped her collar. But the words came out like someone else was saying them, and I could hear the hollow behind each one. He didn't believe it either. I sat alone at the kitchen table, fig curled at my feet. I opened the photo album on my phone, swiped through picture after picture. June leaping in the river. June curled on my chest after surgery. June with Fig side by side like twin shadows. I whispered, "You never let strangers near you. Not once." And you didn't bark that night. You knew? The next morning, Mason checked the camera. He didn't say anything for a while. Just stood there, eyes fixed on the tiny screen, like it was reading him a story he didn't want to hear. Then he turned it around. One frame, blurry, night vision green, but clear enough. Someone, was crouched low, arm outstretched. Massive, shoulders like tree trunks, covered in black fur, but it wasn't an animal. It had hands, one of them reaching down, picking up June's collar, then vanishing into the trees. No eye shine, no glare. Just a shadow moving like it didn't belong in this world. Or maybe it did. And we did. I didn't say anything. Just took the camera, rewound it, watched again. That arm, that hand, the way it moved. Careful, not clumsy, like it meant something. I walked out later that night, collar in one hand, the old piece of fur in the other. Stood by the redwood where I'd found it. Left both at the base. Then I whispered again. "Whatever you are, you couldn't have killed her. You didn't." I walked back without looking over my shoulder, but I felt the trees leaning in. I felt the quiet deepen. And I knew. Something had been watching all along. Not hunting, choosing. And somehow we'd just been chosen back. I didn't know for what yet. But it wasn't over. And June, she hadn't run. She'd followed. And something had waited for her. Just like something was waiting for me. Still breathing. Still listening. Still out there. I kept walking deeper than I shiv. The trail narrowed until it wasn't even a trail anymore. Just layers of pine needles and redwood duff soaking up sound. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the silence was the kind that presses against your chest, waiting for a crack. Fig had stopped following me an hour ago. I think even he knew we'd passed the place where the woods stopped pretending they belonged to us. I wasn't looking for answers. Not really. I just wanted something, anything, of June. Her fur, her print, the ghost of her breath on the cold air. Instead, I found a circle. It wasn't big, maybe 10 feet across. Tucked between the trees like a forgotten room. The stones were arranged carefully, not stacked, not piled, laid, intentional. Around the edge, small sticks formed a kind of frame. And inside, 3 handprints. They weren't smudged. They were pressed hard, so deep the forest floor held their shape like memory. Palm wide as dinner plates, fingers too thick for a person. But the blood, that was human. Or close enough. Still damp, still red. I didn't scream, just stood there, watching the way the light came down through the branches in thin, broken strands, catching the edges of the print like it wanted to draw attention to it. My hands were shaking. I didn't even notice I was backing away until I tripped over a root and nearly fell into the stones. That's when I heard it again. That breath. That same long, low exhale I'd heard outside the kitchen window. But this time, it wasn't behind glass. This time, it was just behind me. I turned fast, too fast, and saw nothing. Just trees, just fog. But I knew. It had been watching. Not stalking. Not circling. Just standing. And when I got home, Mason already had the footage up on his laptop. The trail cam from the night before. He didn't say a word. Just slid the laptop across the table like it was a loaded weapon. The screen showed darkness, then a flicker. Static. Static. The kind that isn't just interference. The kind that bends the sound too, makes it crackle and stretch. Then, for 3 seconds, a pair of eyes. Not glowing, reflecting, intelligent, wide-set. Fixed. They stared directly into the lens, and then they were gone. Mason said nothing, but his hand was clenched on the table, knuckles white. That night I couldn't sit still. Something under my skin kept twitching like a wire pulled too tight. I stepped out to the porch around midnight, air cold and damp. No movement, no noise, and then something hit me, not hard. Not sharp, but enough. I looked down. It was June's collar. Again. Only this time, it was clean, carefully cleaned, and tied to it was a braid, not a fur, not synthetic, human. Here the color of rust and bone, dull, faded, old, braided tight, like someone had done it with purpose a long time ago and preserved it like a token. I don't remember going inside, just remember standing at the kitchen, sink holding it in both hands, breathing through my teeth, staring at the way the braid curled like it had its own memory. Mason thought we should call someone, sheriff, wildlife officer, anyone. But I told him no, not yet. I didn't have words for it, but I knew deep down. This wasn't a threat. It was a message. They could have kept the collar, burned it, buried it, but they gave it back, again, and tied to it. Something human, not proof, a bridge, something passed between worlds. And that's what scared me most. The thought that this wasn't an animal, that maybe it wasn't just watching us, maybe it understood us. I went back the next morning, to the circle, to the stones. I don't know what I expected, but I needed to see it again in daylight. The prints were still there, but this time I noticed something else. Another track, half the size. Another track, right beside one of the big ones. Not a bear, not a raccoon, a foot, small, like a child's. 5 years old, maybe. It had walked there, right next to the larger one. No drag, no limp, just steps, like it belonged. Like it had been led, I crouched down, reached out, traced the smaller print with the tip of my finger. My mouth went dry. I thought of June. I thought of how she didn't bark, of how she vanished without struggle, of how she was let go. Twice, and suddenly, everything inside me cracked wide open. I dropped to my knees, clutched the collar to my chest, looked out into the forest like it could hear me. "If you're keeping her safe," I said, "if you took her to keep her from something worse, I owe you." It didn't matter how stupid it sounded. Didn't matter that no one would believe me. The woods held their breath just like I did, and something told me, way out in that haze of cedar and shadow, something heard me. Something that watches and doesn't blink. It came just before dawn, the kind of hour when the world still feels half-dreamt, when the shadows hold their shape a little too long, and the wind moves like it's remembering something. I was in the kitchen, steeping tea in silence, letting the steam blur the edges of everything when I heard it. Not a growl, not footsteps, just a sharp, brittle sound like something heavy had snapped in two. It came from the woods. I didn't think. I grabbed my coat and boots and went out the back without waking Mason. Fig lifted his head from the rug but didn't follow. The light outside was that pale, unfinished gray that makes you feel like you shouldn't be seeing what you're about to see. I moved quick. The air had a tang to it, like rust and smoke and something else. Blood. I followed the scent before I even realized what I was doing. My boots pressed down into wet earth, soft enough to record every step. And then I saw it. The trail. Thick, black-red smears soaking into the moss, splattered up tree trunks, bleeding into fern and root. It wasn't fresh, but it was recent enough to still shine in the weak light. I pushed past a curtain of low-hanging branches, heart hammering now, every instinct in me telling me to stop. But I didn't, because it was there, curled into itself, hunched behind a rotting log, shoulders rising and falling like bellows, breath catching on something broken inside it. The first thing I noticed wasn't the size. It was the smell, like whetstone bark, and something burning. Then the eyes, half-lidded, amber, and so tired. It was massive, at least 8 feet, maybe more, covered in dark fur streaked with gray and ash. One arm clutched its side, the other trembled every few seconds, like it was fighting to stay conscious. I didn't move. Not a breath. It didn't growl. Didn't flinch. Just watched me. And for a second, I didn't feel afraid. I felt sorry. I reached into my coat pocket slowly, no sudden moves, pulled out the little bundle I'd been carrying with me on walks for weeks now. Gauze, honey-soaked linen, some red yarn. I set it down on the stump near me, then backed away. Its eyes flicked from the bundle to me. Still didn't move, but its chest rose deeper, and the bleeding slowed. I left it there and walked back without turning my back. My spine tingled the whole way, but not with fear. Something else. Mason was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, eyes storm dark. "You went out there alone." I just nodded. He didn't press. That night we heard it again. 3 knocks. Not frantic, not loud. Just deliberate, evenly spaced. On the far side of the house, we stood in the living room like statues, listening. I reached out and grabbed his hand. It didn't happen again. When we woke the next morning, the bundle was gone. And on the windowsill, right above the kitchen sink, sat a stone. Smooth, oval, wrapped in green moss, tied with a strand of grass shaped into a figure 8. No note, no scratch marks. No threat, just placed there like a gift, or an answer. And that's when I knew we were talking. Not with words, with offerings, with presence, with return. It shook me, because it meant they weren't just out there watching. They were choosing how to respond. And then, something else. I was folding laundry that afternoon, when I dropped the bundle of rags and saw it roll out. The braid. The same one from June's collar. Except now, wrapped in the looped grass, was something I hadn't seen before. A single thread woven into the hair. Pale red. Just like the yarn I'd tied to the honeycloth. I sat down hard on the floor and held it in my lap. The hair wasn't synthetic, wasn't dyed. It was human. And too familiar. Too familiar. I dug out the old family album that came with the cabin. The one the landlord said was part of the history. I hadn't opened it in weeks. There, on page 7, was the last family to live here. Photo taken in 97. A girl, maybe 8 years old. Red braid down her shoulder. I looked at the braid in my hand. Looked back at the photo. Same twist. Same length. Same thread. Something tightened in my throat. Mason walked in and saw me sitting on the floor, hands trembling. I handed it to him without saying a word. He didn't ask where I got it. He just sat beside me, and we stared out the window. Because something was telling us, this thing we were part of, it wasn't new. It had been going on for years, maybe decades. And now, we were in it, willing or not. The sun dipped behind the trees, and for a brief second, the window caught the reflection of something tall moving past the tree line. Not running, not hiding, just passing by. And I thought, whatever hurt her, it wasn't us. And I wasn't going to let her die alone in the dark. Not this time. Not like the last one. The braid curled tighter in my palm, and I whispered without thinking, "I see you." And somewhere deep in the forest, something paused, then kept walking. It came during the storm, not the kind that rolls in gentle and heavy, but the kind that throws itself against the walls of your house like it's trying to remember what it means to be wild. Lightning cracked so close it lit the kitchen white, and for a second I thought I saw someone standing out by the barn. But when the thunder chased it, the figure was gone. Mason was pacing. Fig was under the couch, trembling, paws over his nose. The wind howled against the chimney and made it sound like the house was breathing. Wrong. Then we heard it. Not a roar, not a crash. Just the sharp snap of rotting wood splitting in two. Mason grabbed the flashlight and I followed him out into the downpour. We hadn't even cleared the back porch before we saw it, our old livestock shed. The door had been pushed in, sagging like a busted lung. He stepped in first and froze. I smelled the blood before I saw it. Not human, not chicken. Something older, deeper. There, curled in the straw and mud, was something small. It was breathing, shallow, fast. Herding, gray fur matted with rain and flecked with leaves. One leg twisted wrong under the weight of its body. Its eyes, half open, blinked at the flashlight like it had never seen that kind of brightness before. It didn't growl, didn't try to run. It was too tired to do anything but survive. I knelt beside it slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Mason hissed through his teeth. "Eva, no." But I was already reaching. Its skin twitched under my touch, but it didn't pull away, just watched. Its face wasn't quite human, but there was something there. Something ancient and young at the same time. I had never seen a creature like it. But my body, my hands, they knew what to do. I peeled off my coat, tucked it around its shoulders, the way I used to wrap June when she came in soaked and shivering. My hands moved on instinct, checking the leg, looking for broken bone, torn muscle. It whimpered, but didn't bite. It leaned. Then Mason stepped back. I turned to ask what. That's when I saw her, standing just beyond the barn light, just outside the circle where the rain hit hardest, half shielded by trees. She didn't move, just stood there, massive, scarred, soaked. Her fur clung to her frame in heavy clumps, dark with water, darker with blood. One shoulder hung lower than the other, like something had torn it open and never bothered to let it heal right. And her eyes, God. Her eyes, God. Her eyes weren't wild. They were terrified. Terrified not for herself, but for the small one at my feet. I didn't breathe. Didn't dare. The wind shifted, carrying her scent, smoke, pine. Something burnt and bitter. But underneath it all was something I hadn't expected. Grief. She didn't step forward. Didn't roar. Didn't bare teeth. She stayed where she was, waiting, trusting me. Without a word, without a bargain, just that look. Mason didn't speak. He lowered the flashlight and nodded, once, tight. We carried the little one inside wrapped in old towels, set it down by the fireplace, and started boiling water. I ran the first aid steps from muscle memory. Clean, compress, bind, wait, over and over. It whimpered. Then it reached. Not a full hand, more like a gesture. It touched my wrist, not to stop me, to acknowledge me. Fingers rough, nails cracked. But the way it rested them on my skin, It was gentle, and I knew. This wasn't just some wounded animal. It was a child who had lived through something and still wanted to trust. We didn't know what to call it. So Mason said quietly, "Ashfern." The name just hung in the room like mist. It fit somehow. So we kept it. Ashfern, the Stormborn, the one carried in on rain and ruin. For hours we sat by the fire. Me, Mason, and this strange little being wrapped in threadbare blankets, snoring soft. When it stirred, it didn't cry, just blinked at the flames, then at me, like it was trying to remember what comfort felt like. Mason leaned closer. "Did you see her back?" He whispered. I nodded. There were burn scars, curling up from one shoulder, seared deep into the skin like a brand. Not claw marks, not accident. Heat, intent. That wasn't from a predator. That was from metal, from fire, from someone. And my stomach turned, because if this child had been captured, had escaped, then something, or someone, was looking for it. And she, Willow as I'd later call her, had brought it here not to abandon it, but because she had no other place left. The rain let up by dawn. The last crack of thunder rolled lazy across the hills, like the sky was giving up the fight. Ashfern curled into my lap like a dog, not because it was tamed, because it was tired, and when I pressed a hand to its head, it sighed like it hadn't been touched with kindness in a long, long time. I looked at Mason. He didn't say anything. Just stared at the thing we'd let into our home. He didn't need to say it. This wasn't something we could just return to the wild. This was something that had been broken and needed shelter. We didn't ask why she brought it. We didn't ask what hunted it. We just kept the fire going, because sometimes that's all you can do. And as Ashfern drifted to sleep, I let my fingers brush its arm, gently. It flinched, then relaxed. It didn't need to understand English, but it understood that I wasn't hurting. It understood my hands were trying to mend. And in that moment, for the first time since the breath at the window, I felt something shift, something open. Not in the woods, in me. The scream didn't come from Ashfern. It came from the woods, deep, torn. Like rage cracking out of something older than speech. It split the quiet evening like a blade through fabric. Mason was out by the shed checking the locks, and I was inside with Ashfern, reading out loud. Not because he understood the words, but because the sound seemed to soothe him. But when that howl rose through the trees, the little one bolted upright, eyes wide, breath gone, not confused, not startled, terrified. And then the thudding started, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, shaking the ground like drums beating out a warning. I opened the door before Mason could. He was already backing up from the yard, bat grip tight in one hand, flashlight useless in the way his hands trembled. The air tasted like lightning, though the sky was clear. Something electric. Something charged. That's when I saw it. He stepped out of the tree line like the forest had vomited him up. Taller than Willow. Broader, too, covered in tangled fur that looked like it had been through fire. Patches of skin showing through, scarred, warped, pinkish in places like melted wax. One eye white, the other locked straight onto the house. And he was roaring, calling. Not to us. Not for us. For Ashfern. Ashfern whimpered, backing into the corner of the room, arms over his head like he'd done this before. Like he'd been found before. Mason reached for the rifle, but I held up a hand. I wasn't sure what would happen if we fired. I wasn't sure we'd survive it. Then, out of nowhere, Willow was there. She didn't arrive quietly. She exploded into the clearing like thunder wearing skin, bare feet slamming against mud and gravel, hair whipping like smoke behind her. She stood between him and the porch without touching him. Didn't attack, just stood there, breathing heavy, battered arm hanging low, but still strong. He stopped. Not because he was afraid. He snarled low, a sound like branches breaking in a forest fire. She didn't return it, just raised one hand, slowly, palm out. Like she was telling him this wasn't the place. Ashfern crawled to my side, trembling, and clutched the edge of my sweater like a child who knew not to speak during the worst part of a nightmare. I knelt beside him. He kept watching his mother. So did I. Willow's gaze didn't shift. She didn't blink, but something in her shoulders looked tired, not weak, just resolved. I watched the burned one lean in, his ruined face inches from hers, and then he backed away. Slow, turning not to us, but toward the dark behind the trees. He vanished like smoke. Rain started to fall. Slow at first, then heavier. She didn't flinch. She turned her face toward the sky, let it wash over her, and then looked back at the porch. At me and Ashfern. I don't know if what passed between them was a goodbye or a promise. She didn't come up. Didn't try to take him. She just turned. Walked into the trees like she was following something only she could hear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mason sat in the armchair holding the rifle across his lap. Not out of paranoia, out of helplessness. The kind that eats at a man when he can't name the danger. I checked every window, then the cellar. We hadn't used it much since moving it. Too damp, too old. But I cleared it out. Laid down quilts and blankets, stocked water and food. I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me what was coming. Ashfern slept in the basement that night, and in the quiet I heard him breathing, calm, even. Like he knew, for now, he was safe. The next morning, Mason found it. Right outside the shed, carved into the side panel of the barn in long, deliberate claw strokes. An X deep, fresh, scorched around the edges. We didn't say it, but both of us were thinking about the story from the realtor. About the family who vanished here 25 years ago. About the photos in the attic. The one with the girl and the braid. And about the burned wall in the back corner of the old bedroom. The one they said caught from faulty wiring. But we knew now. That fire wasn't an accident. The X was a mark. Not random. A message or a memory. That evening, Willow came back. But not like before. She didn't step from the trees. She didn't look at Mason. Not even at me. She came up to the porch slowly. Stopped. Pressed her forehead against the door like she was resting against the idea of it. Her breath fogged the glass. And then she exhaled. Once, like she was letting go. She stayed like that for almost a full minute. Silent, still, shoulders rising and falling in a rhythm that felt more like mourning than fatigue. Then she stepped back, looked up at the window, and I swear she was crying. She didn't wave, didn't nod, just turned away into the night and didn't come back. Not for days, not even when Ashfern called out in his sleep. I sat with him those nights, wrapped my arms around him, and hummed the way I used to with June after her surgeries. And when he finally stopped shaking, when he finally slept through the night, that's when I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. It started with a smell, burned wood and wet fur, thick in the air like the storm had come back without warning. Mason had just shut the back gate when he froze, hand still on the latch. Fig was already growling, low and mean. That kind of sound he never made unless something unnatural was too close for comfort. I was in the kitchen with Ashfern, wiping down the windows and humming some tune I barely remembered from my childhood. Something my mother used to sing when I was sick and too feverish to sleep. Ashfern was drawing with a broken pencil stub on scraps of brown grocery bag. Circles. A tree. A figure beside it. Something tall. Something smaller holding its hand. Then I heard the first crash. Metal, wood, rage, the horses. I dropped everything. By the time I got outside, the shed was already half collapsed, One wall buckled inward like a fist had punched through it from the outside. Mason was yelling at me at the thing that had just vanished into the night, but I didn't hear any of it, because Ashford was gone. The screen door had swung open. There were prints in the mud, but more than one, heavy ones, too wide for boots, clawed, and lighter ones, bare, small, running toward the barn. I chased them both, didn't stop to grab a flashlight, didn't call out. The air was thick with something feral. The trees shimmered. I could hear Mason's boots behind me, but he didn't say anything this time. He knew we were too late to stay inside. There, in the barnyard mud, under the broken beam, stood the burned one. Bigger in person, worse. His face was twisted with rage or pain, maybe both. His jaw hung slightly open, revealing blunt, rotted teeth, steam curling from his mouth like some engine turned flesh. His chest rose like it had to fight for each breath, and in his eyes, nothing but fire. And then Willow was there. I didn't see her arrive. She just stepped forward. No warning, no sound, like the forest had sent her, or released her. She didn't scream, didn't lunge. She stood between him and Ashford, who was backed against the gate, hands up, shaking but not crying. That silence between them, it wasn't hesitation, it was history. I couldn't breathe. Then it started. The burned one struck first. An arm like a tree limb came down toward her shoulder, but she was faster than anything that size should be. She dodged sideways, rolled, grabbed a length of timber, swung it into his ribs. The crack echoed across the fields. He howled. They circled each other, not like animals, like warriors. Each strike calculated, brutal. Ashford didn't run. He should have. But he just stood there, frozen. Fig came bounding out of nowhere, barking like a demon, teeth bared. I screamed for him to go back, but the burned one didn't strike at Willow. He turned, sudden, and raised his arm toward Fig. It was going to land. It would go and saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. Ashford moved. Fast. He threw himself in front of Fig, arms spread, head low, like he'd seen someone do that before and memorized it. The blow didn't land. Willow tackled him from the side, dragging him down into the hay, away from the child, away from the dog. And that's when I moved too. I lit the flare. One of the old roadside ones Mason kept under the porch since we moved in. Snapped it open. A white burst of heat and light. I threw it at the ground right near the burned one's feet. Sparks leaping across the mud. It worked. He screamed. High, sharp. Not just in pain, but like something inside him broke open. He staggered back, arms covering his eyes, then bolted. Not like a beast. Like something fleeing fire it remembered too well. He disappeared into the dark. Gone. The fight was over. But no one moved for a long time. Willow was crouched in the hay, body between ash fern and the night. Fig sat beside him, licking his ear like it was just another evening. And Ashford looked up at his mother, then at me, then reached down, touched Fig's paw, and patted it gently. He didn't look proud. He looked surprised, like he hadn't even meant to do it. Like saving someone else wasn't something he thought he had inside him. Willow stood turned toward me, her chest rising and falling, fur caked in mud, a long gash down her thigh still bleeding slow. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. She pointed to her chest, then to me, then nodded. I didn't cry, not until later, not until the porch light caught the blood on my hands, and I realized none of it was mine. That night, I sat up by the fire, Ashford asleep with his head on my leg. And I thought about all the stories I'd ever been told about monsters, all the names we'd given things we didn't want to understand. But what I saw that night was not a monster. It was a mother and a child, and something broken trying to become whole again. Spring came like a secret this year. Quiet, late, but sure of itself. The redwoods turned greener. Not new green. The deep kind. Heavy. Patient. The kind of green that grows after fire and silence. We knew we couldn't stay. Not forever. Mason said it first. One morning over coffee, looking out past the porch like he was trying to read the future in the fog. "It's time," he said, and I didn't ask what he meant. We both knew. Ashford had changed. He was stronger now, not just in body, but in how he moved. How he looked at the trees. He'd begun to linger at the edge of the woods again, not with fear, but with recognition. Like something old inside him had started waking up again, like he'd been waiting to remember who he really was. Willow came back one more time. She didn't approach the house, just stood halfway down the slope near the moss log, her body half shadowed in the branches, as if she wasn't sure whether to step fully into the world we'd built or stay behind in the one she came from. Ashford saw her first. He didn't run to her. He walked. Slow, careful, as if afraid she'd disappear. She didn't. She crouched when he reached her, and when he pressed his forehead to hers, I saw her eyes close. That night, Mason and I packed in silence. We didn't take much. Just the things that didn't belong to this place. Everything else we left behind. Honey. Spools of red yarn. A small, hand-knitted scarf that Ashford used to wear when he sat by the fire. A jar of river stones I'd gathered on morning walks. And tucked gently into a basket, wrapped in wax cloth, a single printed photo. Ashford sleeping beside Fig, both of them breathing in sync, like they'd always known each other. We left the basket on the porch, didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. The last morning, the wind was soft. The forest held still in that way it sometimes does when it knows something is changing. The light came through the trees like syrup, thick and golden. We loaded the truck, one slow trip at a time. I waited to lock the door. Then Mason handed me something, a small square of paper. It was folded twice. Inside, drawn in smudged charcoal on the back of an old envelope, was a picture of me. Not perfect. Not even close. The face was crooked. One eye too big. The smile lopsided. But unmistakably me, and behind me, trees. And to my left, a figure small and gray, holding my hand. Ashford's drawing. I don't know how he learned to do that, or when. But I held it like it was made of glass, like it was a voice, saying thank you. We drove away just past Sep. The gravel cracked under the tires, and the woods didn't wave, didn't whisper. They just let us go. That night, in the new house, in a town with sidewalks and porch lights and too much noise, I sat alone by the front window, trying not to think. Fig scratched at the door. I let him out. He walked straight into the trees behind the property. Didn't bark. Didn't look back. He didn't come back that night. But 2 weeks later, we found a photograph. Wedged beneath the welcome mat, a Polaroid. Fig sitting beneath a cypress tree, eyes soft, tongue out. And beside him, Ashford, taller now, healthier, one hand resting on Fig's back. Both of them safe, both of them whole. No note, just the picture. I pressed it to my chest and sat down on the steps. Mason didn't speak. He just wrapped an arm around my shoulder as I tried to breathe through the tightness in my throat, and all I could whisper was the truth that had been growing quietly inside me all along. I didn't rescue them, did I? He looked at me, didn't answer. And I answered myself. They rescued me. And they had, in ways I was only just beginning to understand. There are stories we tell to make sense of the world. And then there are the ones that change how we see it. The quiet ones. The strange, the ones that don't shout, but whisper something ancient beneath the noise. This was never just about fear or survival, or the unknown pressing up against the edges of our lives. It was about the spaces in between human and not, between silence and trust, between what we think we know and what waits patiently for us to understand. Sometimes what we call wild is just something we haven't taken the time to listen to, and sometimes what we call monstrous is only a reflection of our own fear, our need to label, to separate, to control. But if you sit with the silence long enough, if you let the forest speak its own language, you might realize the divide was never as wide as we believed. That kindness is older than language. That grief can live in any shape. That love, real love, transcends species, scars, and silence. The truth is, healing rarely looks the way we expect. It doesn't always come with closure or clarity. Sometimes it walks on uncertain feet. Sometimes it watches from the trees. Sometimes it watches from the trees. But it always leaves a trace, some small, unmistakable mark that says, you mattered. And in a world that moves too fast, forgets too easily, and fears what it cannot name, that is no small thing. So maybe, just maybe, there's room in our hearts for things we don't understand yet. Maybe there's space in this life for mystery without fear, for empathy without reason. Maybe we're not meant to conquer every shadow. Maybe we're just meant to stand beside it long enough to see its shape. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this story touched something quiet inside you, if it made you feel remember, or look out your own window a little longer, leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want to keep hearing stories that linger after the screen fades to black. Until next time, stay curious and stay kind.